The town lay under a heavy blanket of snow, each drifting flake catching the last glow of the winter sun, turning the streets into a pale, glittering white. Cole Harding, a man known more for his guns than his manners, walked alone through the main street. His boots crunched against frozen mud, leaving deep impressions that were quickly softened by the falling snow. The usual din of the town, the laughter, the chatter, the creak of wagon wheels was muted under the weight of winter. Only the occasional bark of a dog or the rattling of shutters in the cold wind broke the silence. Cole's eyes, narrow and calculating, scanned the street. He was a figure carved from solitude itself, tall, broad-shouldered, his brown duster heavy with the day's dust and now flecked with snow. His hat, tipped low, shadowed a face lined with years of survival, the edges of a stubbled beard framing a mouth set in habitual suspicion. He had entered this town countless times before, usually on matters of violence or business, yet tonight was different. Tonight, the air carried a strange promise, Christmas Eve, and with it, an unusual impulse tugged at him. He stopped at the corner of the market, a small, dimly lit stall tucked away from the bustle of merchants selling candles, toys, or blankets. The stall's owner, a wiry man with deep-set, cunning eyes, greeted him with a nod. Behind the counter, several women were lined up, huddled under heavy blankets, their faces pale and tired from travel and neglect. These were Chinese women, recently brought west, some abandoned, some sold, many unwanted by the townsfolk. The murmurs of the people who lingered nearby were filled with judgment and disapproval. They whispered about the immoral practice, about how a man like Cole could possibly take interest in such a transaction. Cole's gaze, however, was fixed on one among them. She was young, perhaps no more than 18, and though she shivered in the cold, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. She did not plead or beg, did not offer a smile to entice a buyer. Instead, she stood with her hands clasped in front of her, dark hair falling partially over her face, eyes downcast but unwavering. There was something about her presence, a strength beneath vulnerability, that drew Cole's attention like a moth to a flame. He approached the merchant with a slow, deliberate gait. "How much for the girl at the end?" he asked, his voice low and steady, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The merchant's eyes flickered, uncertain if Cole was serious. Normally, these women were bought by the highest bidder or left behind to be forgotten. Cole's reputation as a ruthless gunslinger did not prepare the merchant for this. Cole was offering more than mere curiosity. He intended to buy her. After a tense negotiation, the price was settled, higher than usual, not as a display of wealth, but out of some inner compulsion Cole could not name. He pressed gold coins into the merchant's palm, sealing the transaction with a quiet authority that left the onlookers murmuring in disbelief. Some shook their heads, certain the gunslinger had lost his mind. Others watched with thinly veiled intrigue, sensing the beginning of something extraordinary. As Cole led the young woman away from the stall, the snow began to fall more heavily, curling around them like ghostly ribbons. The woman's posture was stiff, cautious, but she did not resist. Her eyes, dark and calm, finally met his, carrying a mix of curiosity and measured wariness. She spoke softly in broken English, offering thanks. Her words were careful, deliberate, not servile, not desperate, but genuine. Cole's chest tightened in a way unfamiliar to him. He was not accustomed to soft words, or to feeling the warmth of gratitude directed at him without obligation or manipulation. The walk to his cabin was silent, save for the crunch of boots on snow and the occasional whisper of wind. Cole's mind churned. He had spent years surviving on his own, relying on sharp reflexes and a quick draw to navigate a world where weakness meant death. But here he was confronted with something far more disarming than a duel or a robbery: the quiet strength of a human life, fragile yet unbroken, standing before him. He pondered the unfairness of the world that had brought her here, the indifference of townsfolk, the cruelty of merchants profiting from human suffering. And yet, in that bleak reality, he had offered a measure of protection. The woman did not speak again, but her eyes continued to observe him, noticing the small things: the way he adjusted the strap of his gun belt, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful way he navigated the slippery snow. She saw not just the gunslinger, the man feared and respected, but the human beneath, the man capable of choices that went beyond survival. Cole, for his part, felt an unfamiliar awareness of being observed, of being judged not by reputation, but by intent. As they neared the cabin, Cole paused. The building was modest, constructed of weathered timber, smoke curling from the chimney into the gray sky. He had lived here alone for years, a solitary sentinel over his own small claim of land. But tonight, the presence of another, someone whose fate had intertwined with his, made the cabin seem less like a fortress and more like a temporary haven. The woman's gaze lingered on the structure as well, her expression a mixture of apprehension and tentative hope. Cole glanced at her face for the first time fully. Snowflakes clung to the strands of her hair, accentuating the contours of her features, yet still partially hidden. Even in partial obscurity, something in her expression caused him to freeze, not out of fear, but shock. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a depth of experience and emotion that seemed beyond her years. It was a gaze that held stories he could not yet understand, stories of hardship, survival, and resilience that mirrored, in a strange way, his own. He led her inside, shutting the door against the cold, and for a moment the cabin was filled with only the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. Cole removed his gloves and hat, revealing a face drawn and tense, unaccustomed to quiet domesticity. The woman settled near the fire, her movements careful, respectful of the unfamiliar space. She did not speak, but her eyes followed him as he moved about, observing silently. There was no fear in her gaze now, only a cautious trust. Cole sat across from her, staring into the fire. He reflected on the events that had brought them together. A chance encounter, a moral choice, a transaction that carried far more weight than a simple purchase. In the silence, he realized that Christmas Eve had transformed into something far more significant than he could have anticipated. It was not merely a night of cold and snow. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could yet predict. The woman, quiet and composed, represented a future that challenged his solitary existence, a future that promised connection, empathy, and perhaps even redemption. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a quiet, ethereal peace. Inside, two lives had intersected in a way that defied expectation. Cole Harding, the gunslinger feared and respected by all, had taken a step he did not fully understand. He had chosen to act not for power, or revenge, or gain, but simply because it felt right. And the woman, standing at the threshold of a new life, had placed her trust in him, an act of courage that would forever bind their fates together. And yet, as the fire crackled and shadows danced along the walls, one fact remained. Cole had not yet seen her fully, had not yet confronted the truth hidden behind the dark hair and careful demeanor. That moment, when her face would be revealed completely, would freeze him in a way nothing else ever had. But for now, on this snowy Christmas Eve, two strangers sat together in the warmth of a fire, the world outside hushed by winter, unaware that their lives had irrevocably changed. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, casting golden flickers across the wooden walls. Cole Harding sat stiffly in his chair, the familiar weight of his revolver at his hip, feeling both comforting and unnecessary for once. The young woman, who had followed him from the marketplace, settled carefully on the small rug before the fire, hands clasped, knees tucked neatly under her skirt. Snow continued to fall beyond the cabin walls, muffling the night and lending a quiet, almost sacred stillness to the space. Cole had been watching her since they entered. There was something in the way she carried herself, a combination of strength and caution that piqued his curiosity. Yet, despite his focus, he had never fully seen her face. Her long, dark hair had fallen in a curtain over her features, and she had not lifted it since arriving. Every time he had tried to catch a glimpse, she had instinctively tilted her head away, leaving him with only glimpses of a smooth cheek or a flash of dark eyes. A tension hung between them, subtle but palpable. Cole was a man used to control, used to reading people quickly, assessing threats, and making life-or-death decisions in an instant. Yet here, in the quiet cabin, he felt strangely powerless. He was consumed by an unspoken curiosity. What did she look like? Who was she, really, beneath the tired expression and guarded posture? And why did he feel an unexpected surge of something, protective, almost tender, at the thought of her vulnerability? The woman shifted slightly, her eyes meeting his across the fire. There was a moment of mutual recognition. She understood his gaze, and he recognized her hesitation. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she slowly raised her hands to her hair, lifting the dark curtain that had hidden her face since their first meeting. Time seemed to slow as the strands fell away, revealing a visage that stopped Cole cold. Her features were delicate yet striking, high cheekbones, a soft jawline, lips full but unassuming, and eyes that held a depth of emotion far beyond her years. But it was not merely her beauty that froze him. It was the recognition, the subtle familiarity that sent a jolt through his chest. Something about her face, the curve of her brow, the shadow beneath her eyes, stirred a memory in Cole, a fleeting, almost forgotten recollection of someone from his past, a distant echo of a face he had known long ago, though he could not yet place it. The young woman noticed his pause, the sudden stillness in his posture, and her own expression shifted subtly. There was neither fear nor malice, only a quiet curiosity, a gentle expectation that he might speak, that he might reveal the thoughts passing through his mind. Cole, however, remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line, as his mind raced to reconcile what he was seeing. He remembered fleeting glimpses from years ago. A small village near the river. A child with dark hair and wide eyes, A tragic fire, a family torn apart by greed and violence. Could it be? No, it was impossible. And yet, the resemblance was uncanny. The weight of the possibility pressed down on him, mixing with a growing awareness of the life he had just purchased. She was not merely an anonymous victim of circumstance. There was history here, history that might intertwine with his own in ways he could not yet comprehend. Cole finally spoke, his voice low, roughened by disbelief and uncertainty. "Your face, he trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding either foolish or incredulous. The woman tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes searching his. She did not smile, did not correct him, but instead waited, as if granting him the space to speak. There was a confidence in her stillness, a strength that matched his own, yet it carried a warmth he had long avoided in others. The silence stretched, filled only by the fire's crackling and the muffled hush of the snowfall outside. Cole felt a strange sensation in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with fear or cold. It was a mixture of astonishment, confusion, and an unexpected tenderness, a recognition that life had unexpectedly handed him a moment he had not earned, a truth he could neither ignore nor fully understand. The woman's story began to unfold then, in fragments. Through careful words and hesitant gestures, she spoke of her journey westward, the betrayal and abandonment she had endured, the struggle to survive in a world that viewed her as disposable. Her English was careful, measured, yet it carried the cadence of someone who had endured more than any person her age should have. Cole listened intently, feeling a mixture of guilt and respect. He had purchased her freedom from the marketplace, but he realized that freedom was more complex than he had imagined. The scars she carried were not only physical. They were etched deep into her spirit, shaped by every hardship, every loss, every moment she had been forced to fend for herself. As she spoke, Cole noticed the subtleties of her demeanor, the slight tremor in her hands when she recounted moments of fear, the way her eyes brightened with fleeting hope, the quiet dignity she maintained despite everything. Each revelation struck him with the force of someone learning a truth that cannot be ignored. He had expected a simple transaction, a mundane act of purchase. Yet he had been handed a living story, a human life intertwined with grief, courage, and resilience. Cole finally leaned back, exhaling slowly, the weight of comprehension pressing down on him. He realized that the woman before him was more than an unknown figure or a mysterious stranger. She was someone who demanded acknowledgement, someone whose life had been dismissed by countless others, yet whose presence could not be ignored by him. In that moment, the firelight danced across her face, illuminating not just her features, but the strength, pain, and quiet hope that resided there. And then, with a voice steadier than he expected, he asked the question that had haunted him since he first saw her. "Who are you, really?" The woman hesitated, as if measuring the weight of truth, and then, in measured tones, began to share fragments of her life, details that hinted at a past intertwined with mystery, with loss, with secrets that even Cole's hardened mind could not yet piece together. The cabin, the fire, the falling snow, all faded into insignificance as Cole absorbed her words. His hands, once quick to draw a gun or strike with precision, now rested uselessly at his sides, unable to act, but compelled to listen. Every sentence, every inflection, carried weight, shaping his understanding of the person he had acquired, not purchased, not owned, but rescued in a way he had never anticipated. Outside, the Christmas Eve snow thickened, covering the world in white silence. Inside, Cole Harding, the gunslinger feared by all, sat frozen, not from danger, but from revelation. The woman had revealed her face, and with it, a glimpse of a truth so profound, so unexpected that it would reshape the choices he had thought he controlled. She was no longer simply a young bride in a market transaction. She was a person, a life, a story demanding respect, attention, and perhaps something deeper, an unlikely connection that neither of them yet fully understood, but which would guide every decision to come. Cole's chest felt tight, a strange mixture of awe, disbelief, and something dangerously like hope stirring within him. The woman's eyes met his, steady, unwavering, as if challenging him to acknowledge the truth of her existence. For the first time in years, he felt unarmed, vulnerable, not against guns or threats or men, but against the power of human presence, of identity, and of a face that would haunt him long after the snow melted from the streets outside. The cabin, though small and weathered, offered a warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting cold outside. Snow continued to blanket the town in silence, muffling every sound except the occasional distant howl of a wolf or the creak of timber contracting in the frost. Cole Harding moved about his modest dwelling with the familiarity of a man who had spent years alone. Yet tonight, everything felt different. The young woman he had purchased, though purchased, felt wrong in his mind now, sat quietly on the rug, watching the fire, her presence filling the room with a delicate tension he could not shake. Cole's usual habits persisted. He stoked the fire, placed logs carefully to maintain steady warmth, and checked the locks on the cabin door. Every movement, though mundane, was heavy with unspoken awareness. He was acutely conscious of her gaze, subtle, cautious, measuring. She did not flinch at his movements, nor avert her eyes. She simply observed, quiet but attentive, as if cataloging every detail of this strange man who had, moments before, seemed untouchable, and now felt strangely human. Her face, revealed fully the night before, lingered in his mind. High cheekbones, smooth skin, eyes deep with history and resilience. Cole found himself studying the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, the subtle furrow of her brow when she was uncertain. He had spent years assessing danger in others, calculating risk, identifying threats. But here, there was no need to gauge for malice. She carried none. Instead, there was a quiet, unspoken challenge to see her as she was, to acknowledge her humanity, and perhaps, in doing so, to confront the walls he had built around his own heart. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but measured. "Your cabin is small." It was not a question, merely an observation. Cole's lips twitched into the faintest semblance of a smile, though he quickly suppressed it. "It's enough," he replied, voice low, cautious, still carrying that edge that reminded her he was a gunslinger, not a companion. She nodded, seemingly accepting the brevity, yet her eyes searched him with a curiosity that unsettled him in ways he could not articulate. Silence fell again, heavier this time, filled with the crackle of the fire. The young woman shifted slightly, moving closer to the warmth. Cole noticed her hands, delicate and trembling ever so slightly from the cold, and without thinking, he grabbed a spare blanket from the chair. He draped it around her shoulders, the gesture instinctive, unthinking. She did not startle, did not protest. Instead, she allowed it, a small acknowledgement of the first act of care she had received from him, not as a buyer, not as a gunslinger, but as a man capable of kindness. The act, minor though it seemed, altered the dynamic between them. She lifted her gaze, eyes meeting his for the first time, without hesitation. In those dark pools, he saw both assessment and acceptance, a silent recognition that he had chosen to act differently than the world expected. She was testing him, yes, but not in a manipulative sense. She was watching to see if he was capable of something more than survival, of something beyond the violence and isolation that defined him. Hours passed slowly, the storm outside intensifying. The wind battered the cabin walls, snow piling high against the door. Cole remained near the fire, revolver at his side, though the familiar weight now seemed almost ceremonial rather than necessary. The woman did not move from the rug, her hands clasped, her back straight, her demeanor both respectful and cautious. Occasionally, she whispered fragments of her story, small memories, her journey west, the hardships she had endured. Each word added layers to the image he had already constructed in his mind. She was no longer an abstraction, no longer a mysterious figure whose face had surprised him. She was a person with history, with depth, with wounds he could neither ignore nor fully comprehend. Cole found himself speaking in return, slowly, carefully. He had not shared his own story in years, and yet the need arose now. He spoke of small details, life on the trail, encounters with outlaws, the solitude that had defined him. Not every story was heroic. Some were simply confessions of mistakes, of decisions made in haste, of losses he carried silently. Her reactions were subtle, soft nods, a quiet murmur of understanding, an occasional glance that conveyed empathy without words. In the flickering firelight, something began to shift. The tension between them, previously sharp and cautious, softened. She asked him questions, not prying or invasive, but gentle inquiries born of curiosity. How he had learned to survive, what he thought of the world beyond the mountains, whether he had ever wished for something more. Each question was a test, perhaps, but also an opening, a bridge across the chasm of isolation that had defined his life. Cole realized he did not recoil from the questions. He answered honestly, if sparingly, feeling an unfamiliar vulnerability in the act of sharing. The night stretched on, and with it, the boundaries between them began to blur. Not fully, not yet, but enough that each could sense the possibility of connection. Trust, fragile and tentative, began to take root in the space between firelight and shadows. At one point, the woman stood and moved closer to the table, retrieving a small piece of bread she had saved. She offered it to him silently. Cole, startled by the gesture, accepted it. It was a small act of sharing, but in it lay profound meaning. She trusted him enough to offer sustenance. He accepted it without suspicion. In that simple exchange, the first threads of mutual respect and understanding were woven, imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Cole noticed subtle details about her as the night deepened. The faint tremor of her lips as she hummed a quiet tune from her homeland. The way her fingers traced the edges of the rug absently. The careful attention she gave to her surroundings, measuring danger even here in his cabin. It struck him that she had endured much, yet retained a composure and dignity that defied her circumstances. For the first time in years, he felt challenged, not by outlaws or lawmen, but by the quiet strength of another human being. Sleep eventually crept in, slow and reluctant. Cole, accustomed to solitary nights filled with vigilant watchfulness, found himself lying awake longer than usual. He listened to her breathing, soft and steady, feeling a strange protective impulse rise within him. She was not merely someone he had purchased. She was someone whose safety he now felt responsible for, whose trust he could not betray. The realization was both startling and unfamiliar, forcing him to confront emotions he had long buried beneath the armor of solitude and self-reliance. Outside, the storm raged on, snow piling against the cabin, obscuring the world beyond. Inside, two lives were gradually finding common ground. One night, one shared space, and countless unspoken words laid the foundation for a fragile, tentative understanding. Cole Harding, gunslinger and loner, discovered that trust could be extended, that vulnerability could be shared, and that perhaps, even in the harshest winter, warmth could be found in the presence of another human being. As the first light of dawn crept through the frost-lined windows, illuminating the cabin in a pale winter glow, Cole finally allowed himself to relax slightly. The woman stirred, her dark eyes meeting his once more, and he recognized a subtle acknowledgement. The night had passed without harm, without betrayal, without fear overwhelming trust. The connection was small, almost imperceptible, yet real. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name, a fragile thread tying their fates together. Fragile, but unbroken, forged in the quiet intimacy of shared space and unspoken understanding. And for the first time in years, Cole Harding realized that survival alone was not enough, that human connection, trust, and even companionship were a form of strength he had never allowed himself to feel. The morning sun broke weakly over the snow-covered horizon, casting a pale, silvery light across the mountains. Cole Harding awoke first, as always, his eyes flicking open to the familiar cold draft sneaking through the cabin walls. The fire from the night before had burned low, leaving only embers that glowed faintly. He pulled on his worn boots and adjusted the revolver at his hip, instincts still attuned to danger, though the danger last night had been of a different sort, human, emotional, and fragile. The young woman was awake as well. She sat by the embers, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, brushing lightly against the small bundle of blankets she had kept close. Her eyes met his with a quiet acknowledgement, neither expectant nor anxious, only patient. There was a rhythm to her composure, the kind that comes from years of surviving, when trust is scarce and hope is fragile. Cole noticed how the snow from outside had lightly dusted the cabin floor, how the chill seeped into her fingers despite the fire. Without a word, he moved to the small woodpile and began adding logs, the sound of the splitting wood echoing in the silent cabin. Breakfast was simple: a few stale biscuits, a thin slice of cured meat, and strong coffee that burned the throat but warmed the spirit. They ate in near silence, the only sounds being the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the cabin. Cole watched her closely, noting the way she handled the food, careful not to waste any, methodical in a way that spoke of both necessity and discipline. It was a small act, mundane in any other setting, but in the stark, isolated world they inhabited, it revealed character, resilience, and adaptation. Cole stood after eating and tossed a thick cloak over his shoulders. "We're going outside," he said, voice low but steady. There was no question in his tone, yet it was neither harsh nor commanding. The woman looked up at him, a faint flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She had survived countless challenges, and she knew the world beyond the cabin was unforgiving. The snow was deep, the cold merciless, and the town they might encounter was full of judgment, suspicion, and open hostility. Yet she did not protest. She stood, adjusting the folds of her simple dress, and allowed him to drape a spare cloak over her shoulders, shielding her from the bitter wind. They stepped outside together. The snow crunched underfoot, deep and uneven. The landscape transformed into a blinding white expanse that stretched to the horizon. Cole's boots sank into the drifts, and he noted the woman's careful steps, how she tested each surface before committing her weight. He felt a protective instinct rise within him, a mixture of vigilance and concern, as though the harshness of the outside world had suddenly become his responsibility. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, carried the potential for danger, and he was acutely aware of it. Their journey to the town was slow, deliberate. Cole led the way, rifle slung across his back, revolver at his side, scanning constantly. The woman followed close behind, her hands hidden beneath the cloak, eyes scanning the terrain, alert yet composed. Along the way, they passed skeletal trees dusted in frost, the occasional frozen creek glinting under the weak sunlight. It was a world that tested them physically and mentally, demanding focus, endurance, and cooperation. When they reached the outskirts of the town, the reactions of the townsfolk were immediate and varied. Some froze, recognizing Cole Harding and the young woman beside him. Whispers ran through the sparse crowd. He actually bought one? She doesn't belong here. What does he want with her? The air was thick with judgment, suspicion, and curiosity. Cole ignored them, his gaze scanning for any real threat, while the woman's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the people and their intentions. She did not flinch at the stares, did not shrink under the scrutiny, though the weight of societal prejudice pressed upon her like an invisible hand. Cole led her to the marketplace, a small hub where merchants sold basic supplies. He approached a vendor, exchanging a few words over the purchase of flour, dried meat, and firewood. The woman observed silently, noting the interactions, the subtleties in Cole's body language, the way he commanded respect without raising his voice. She began to understand not just his skill with a gun, but his skill with people, a subtle, precise control over environment, a protection exercised not through force alone, but through reputation, awareness, and composure. Yet the outside world was not entirely passive. A group of men, likely drunk or simply cruel, began whispering and snickering as Cole and the woman passed. One stepped forward, mocking. Looks like Harding finally found himself a pet. Cole's hand twitched near his revolver, but he did not draw it. Instead, he stopped, letting the man see his eyes, cold and unwavering. The mockery faltered. In that silence, authority passed without a single shot fired. The woman noticed, and for the first time, a subtle sense of security replaced her caution. She realized that Cole was not merely a man of action, but a protector, someone whose presence could ward off harm without violence. They continued through the marketplace, Cole making necessary purchases, the woman walking just behind him, observing, learning, adjusting. She asked questions quietly. Is it always like this outside? Cole gave brief, honest replies, never sugarcoating the harshness of the world, the danger, the cruelty. Yet in his honesty, there was a lesson, an education in survival, awareness, and prudence. The woman listened, absorbing each word, understanding not just the environment, but the man beside her, the one who had chosen to claim responsibility for her safety. By midday, the sun had climbed higher, but the cold was relentless. They returned to the cabin with supplies, trudging through snow that had risen since morning. The woman's face was flushed from exertion and cold, her hands raw despite the gloves. Yet there was a subtle brightness in her eyes, a tentative spark of confidence, of trust. She had navigated the outside world, observed the town, and survived without incident. Cole noticed this change, this quiet acknowledgement of capability, and allowed himself the faintest recognition of her resilience. Inside the cabin, they settled near the fire once more. The woman helped arrange the supplies, stacking them neatly, moving with precision and care. Cole watched, silently impressed, and perhaps for the first time, he allowed himself a measure of appreciation, not for the act itself, but for the person performing it. It was trust, he realized, slowly building in layers, reinforced through observation, endurance, and mutual understanding. The day wore on, and the storm outside eased slightly, leaving a hushed, reflective silence over the snow-laden landscape. Cole sat back, observing the woman as she worked, as she moved with purpose, as she finally allowed herself moments of small comfort by the fire. It was a fragile piece, easily shattered, yet real. He felt a sense of responsibility, yes, but also of connection, a tether that had begun to form between them, binding them in quiet, unspoken agreement that, at least for now, they could rely on one another. And as night fell again, the shadows stretching long across the cabin floor, Cole Harding realized that trust, once given cautiously and tentatively, had begun to take root. The first venture outside, the exposure to judgment, to danger, and to the harsh realities of the world, had not broken it. Instead, it had tempered it, refined it, and allowed them both to glimpse a possibility neither had expected. That in a world defined by isolation, violence, and prejudice, a bond could emerge, fragile yet resilient, between two souls who had chosen, against all odds, to step into the cold together and survive. The snow lay heavy on the ground, thick enough that even the familiar paths to Cole Harding's cabin had nearly disappeared. Inside, the warmth of the fire fought against the creeping chill of the winter air seeping through the cracks in the wooden walls. The day had passed without incident, save for the quiet tension between them. But Cole felt the unease that always came before trouble. He was a man attuned to danger, not merely because of the threats of men with guns, but because the world itself had a way of testing resolve when least expected. The woman, now somewhat accustomed to the cabin and its rhythms, had moved freely about the small space, stacking supplies, tending to the fire, and performing small tasks without hesitation. There was a subtle grace in the way she navigated the room, a quiet confidence in her actions. Yet even as she worked, her eyes remained alert, scanning the edges of the cabin and the shadows outside. Cole noticed this vigilance, a testament to the life she had lived, one of constant uncertainty and vigilance. He did not question it. He only respected it. By mid-afternoon, a distant rumble reached their ears. Cole stiffened immediately, trained instincts flaring. The sound was not of the wind nor the natural settling of the cabin. It was deliberate, heavy, mechanical. A wagon approaching, not quietly, but with purpose. His hand went instinctively to the rifle slung across his back. The woman's head lifted at the sound, her expression a mixture of alertness and controlled apprehension. She did not panic. Instead, she moved closer to Cole, standing just behind him, silent but attentive. The wagons came into view, as snow thinned slightly with the rise of the sun. A small group of men rode alongside them, figures shadowed beneath the brims of hats and coats, faces obscured by scarves. Their presence carried malice, the aura of men who had learned cruelty early and wielded it without hesitation. Cole recognized the type instantly. Bounty hunters, opportunists, or worse, men seeking revenge for reasons he had long since forgotten. Yet it was their attention to the young woman that made his blood run cold. He stepped in front of her, rifle leveled not in haste, but in precision. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low, controlled. The woman did as instructed, but her eyes met his briefly, conveying understanding rather than fear. She had endured much worse than a group of strangers in the snow. Yet Cole knew the stakes. Any confrontation here could end in injury or death if he was not vigilant. The men dismounted, approaching the cabin with a mixture of aggression and mockery. "That girl's not yours to take, Harding," one sneered, voice dripping with condescension. Another laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "We've been looking for her. You'll answer for this." Cole's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension radiating off the men, the violence waiting like a coiled spring. But he did not falter. His eyes narrowed, calculating. The snow offered little cover, and the firelight inside the cabin threw their shadows across the frozen ground, exposing their approach. The woman stepped forward, quietly, surprisingly. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. Cole glanced at her, surprised at her composure. "Enemies or fools, doesn't matter. Just keep close, stay quiet." Her eyes didn't waver. Instead, they reflected an understanding that the world outside, no matter the danger, demanded presence of mind and courage. The confrontation was tense but controlled. Cole spoke first, his words carrying authority, not threat alone. "Leave, she is under my protection. You cross her, and you answer to me." The men laughed again, mocking. But there was something in the calm steadiness of his voice, the unwavering aim of his rifle, that gave pause. Cole's reputation preceded him, yet here it was not merely fear. It was the recognition that he was a man who lived and operated by his own rules, capable of violence and precise judgment. One of the men lunged forward, attempting to intimidate. Cole's movements were fluid, trained, catching the man by the arm, twisting just enough to send him sprawling in the snow. Another reached for a gun, but a sharp kick from Cole sent it skittering away, metal clanging against the frozen earth. The others froze, momentarily uncertain, and the woman watched in quiet fascination, realizing that the man she had come to rely on was not only a protector by choice, but formidable in skill. After a tense moment, the men backed down, retreating into the snow-laden landscape, muttering threats that carried more bravado than intent. Cole lowered his rifle, but did not relax fully. His eyes scanned the horizon, ensuring the danger had truly passed. The woman exhaled softly, a subtle smile touching her lips, not from triumph, but relief and recognition. She had witnessed firsthand the measure of the man who had rescued her, and with that, her trust deepened. The snowstorm resumed, thickening the world outside once more. Cole and the woman returned to the cabin, where silence settled over the room like a protective blanket. Both were aware of the unspoken bond that had formed, not merely survival, but trust, respect, and a recognition of mutual strength. Cole, who had spent years isolating himself, felt an unfamiliar sense of purpose, a responsibility beyond mere survival. The woman, whose past had taught her to rely on few, found in him a figure of stability, a presence capable of both protection and understanding. As night fell, the cabin grew quiet once more. Cole sat by the fire, the woman across from him, their gazes occasionally meeting in silence. Words were unnecessary. The events of the day had conveyed more than any conversation could. They shared a meal, simple and unpretentious, but each bite carried the weight of shared experience. Every glance, every measured movement, reinforced the bond forming between them, a bond built on trust, courage, and the recognition of one another as more than mere survivalists in a harsh world. Eventually, the woman spoke, her voice soft yet steady. I never thought someone would protect me like that." Cole's gaze met hers, unflinching. "I didn't either," he admitted. "But here we are." There was no false bravado in his words, no attempt to diminish the significance of the day. It was an acknowledgement, quiet but profound, of the connection forged under extreme circumstances. The night stretched on, the storm outside relentless, but inside, the warmth of fire and shared understanding created a sanctuary. Cole observed the woman, noting the subtle ways she relaxed in his presence, the way her posture shifted from caution to tentative comfort. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that protection was not merely a matter of guns or threats. It was presence, vigilance, and respect for another human being's autonomy and dignity. By midnight, the snowstorm had dulled to a gentle whisper. The two sat together, not speaking, simply existing in a shared space, bound by the trials of the day. Trust, once fragile and tentative, had hardened into something more substantial, not unbreakable, perhaps, but resilient. Cole Harding, gunslinger, loner, man of solitude, had discovered that connection could be found even in the harshest winter, even in a world defined by cruelty and prejudice. And the woman, who had endured betrayal, hardship, and isolation, recognized that safety, understanding, and perhaps even the possibility of something like hope could exist in the unlikeliest of places. Their bond, forged through challenge, danger, and mutual recognition, was now undeniable. The events of the day had tested them, revealed truths about character, courage, and loyalty, and ultimately cemented a partnership neither had anticipated, but both had silently chosen to honor. In the quiet aftermath, as snow drifted silently across the world outside, the cabin held two lives forever altered. A gunslinger and the young woman he had rescued from the harsh cruelty of the marketplace now shared not only warmth, shelter, and safety, but the beginnings of trust, respect, and a bond that could endure whatever storms the world might throw at them.